Major phone carriers make you sign contracts with rigid data plans to trap you into a kind of forced phonogamy. Sounds pretty insecure if you ask me. At Consumer Cellular, we believe in a more consensual and healthy form of phonogamy, free of contracts and more flexible to your data needs. This way, you stick around not because we force you to with contracts and fees, but because you love our phone plans. Like ardently love our phone plans. Phonogamously. Consumer Cellular. When freedom calls, we're here to answer. Call us at 1-888-FREEDOM.
Hello and welcome to The Price of Football, the show that looks at the money behind the beautiful game with me, Kevin Day, and Liverpool University's Kieran Maguire, who actually struggled to look at the beautiful game at all last Sunday, Kieran. A lot of complaints from the colourblind community that it was impossible for you people to tell Liverpool and Man U apart.
Well, it was. I mean, it was trailed as the biggest match in the season because they were first and third respectively. Sky actually got their highest ever ratings for a match being shown. Clearly, it helps having the whole of the country locked indoors. so there were some positives. He sat down yeah, if you are colourblind, that was it. Red and green is an absolute nightmare. So. I put up something on Twitter just as a whinge.
Yeah.
That got picked up by quite a few organisations. It ended up on the likes of ESPN and the BBC. So then I was contacted by the Premier League to say, well, there are protocols. And I dropped a line to Manchester United, again, just as a whinge. And to be fair to Manchester United, they have been in contact. In fact, they phoned up and said, well, we did make a sort of change in the sense that we were supposed to be playing in green socks and we played in white socks. I said, yeah, it helped a little bit. And the only other thing I could work out was Paul Pogba because of his haircut, because he's got that, he's got that fairly jazzy haircut. And other than that, it was a struggle. And after half an hour, I said to the Baroness, I can't do this anymore. And I turned over, or I went onto Netflix and I watched the man who's always guaranteed to cheer me up is Bill Nighy. So I watched Pride, which was an absolutely fantastic film about a group of gay people in the early 80s who decided to financially support the miners in Wales, and they went to Wales, and it was how they overcome sort of the barriers on a one-to-one basis and a community basis. And it was one of those incredibly uplifting films. So by all accounts, I probably did okay because I understand the match was a bit of a turkey.
Yes, I know some of the people involved in making the film and some of the people who were there back in the 80s when the actual story happened. And, of course, Bill Nighy is a Palace fan, so what else would you expect other than to be overjoyed by Bill Nighy? Just on this situation, Kieran, because it is... I mean, it's something that people laugh about. I mean, I remember Brian Moore of blessed memory, my favourite broadcaster back in the black and white days when I think it was Man United playing Everton. He said, for those of you struggling, Everton are kicking from left to right, which didn't really help. But how many people are you talking about, Kieran, who have paid for Sky and can't actually watch it because they're colourblind?
Well, 9% of men are colourblind. There's hardly any women because of the way our chromosomes work. Men have got two X chromosomes, and women have got an X and a Y chromosome. So it's all connected to that. So it is a much higher number, and I appreciate on the scale of afflictions to have, it's hardly twitching the meter. But the other good thing that Manchester United said today was that there will not be a problem this weekend because, of course, Manchester United are playing Liverpool again. So they're aware of it as being an issue, and going forwards, they're confident that it won't be a problem. It's happened on a few other matches. I mean, it's even worse for rugby because I've given up watching Wales versus Ireland. Yeah. Because that is red shirts and white shorts versus green shirts and white shorts, and you haven't got the foggiest. I mean, not that you ever go to watch rugby, of course. Yeah,
I explained to of course you don't. Yeah, of course you can't see the ball for a start. What sort of sport is it when you can't see the ball after the game? I explained to Ali your problem with the Man United Liverpool game and said Kieran's colourblind, and she just went, "Yeah, of course he is." So
she's seen me dress.
Maybe that's what it is. I in an attempt to take this seriously, Kieran, I think it does need to be taken seriously if there are that many people who are colourblind. who have actually paid to watch the games, who have subscriptions to Sky or BT. I spoke to somebody who was very senior in television broadcasting and is happy to help us on request. And he said broadcasters, it's in their remit, it's in the contract. Broadcasters can actually ask for a change of kit. It's not just the referee who decides that there's a colour clash. Broadcasters can say that there's a colour clash, we don't like it. He said, but obviously for the most part, the needs of the colourblind, as you say, are very low down their priority. So maybe this will move it up a bit. And let's face it, Kieran, with the amount of kits clubs have, there is absolutely no excuse for any kind of colour clash at all, to be perfectly honest, is there?
Yeah. And remember, Manchester United have got that unusual sort of squash zebra kit in white and black, which would have been absolutely perfect from a colour clash perspective. So it's not as if they didn't have, but their argument was that they actually planned things weeks in advance, and they only got the call from the Premier League relatively shortly before the match. So it was already, they'd already gone through with their protocols, and presumably there's things to do with cleaning the kits and making sure right sizes, and they're not the off the shelf stuff that we get from our local sports store. So it's done, it's gone, and I don't think it's going to happen again.
Yeah, I have friends who work at Sky, and I admire the way Sky cover football, but the cynical part of me does really enjoy it when a game that they've plugged for weeks as being the game of the season turns out to be a shocking, terrible, dull, boring game. There's a slight element of Schadenfreude. I was trying to think of, is there a German word for Schadenfreude? Actually went through my head then. We have a lot of news stories today, Kieran.
Oh boy, do we have a lot of news stories.
And some of these are stories that are held over from last Sunday's pod, mainly because a certain white-shirted team from the East Midlands unexpectedly took up half the questions pod. I'll sod it, Kieran. Should we get that bit out of the way first? Is there any more news from that quarter, knowing full well that there is?
Yes, there's two stories in relation to Derby County, and we genuinely are so looking forward to the day when they've not been on the show for a month.
Yeah.
But the first story is in relation to the takeover. It was first sort of indicated it was taking place in November, then it was going to be finished before Christmas, and then sort of talks, the money's in place, there need to be some checks for money laundering and so on. And we're now, 20th of January, and nothing's gone forwards. So there was a story in one of the papers in the last couple of days, is the club is now starting to make contingency plans along the lines of this deal might not go ahead. I've been talking to some people in the Northeast in relation to Newcastle. The prospective owner was at one point linked with the Newcastle takeover. And the viewpoint from the people I've spoken to in Newcastle is they were never convinced that he was all he claimed to be. The claims of very close links with Sheikh Mansour of Abu Dhabi seem to be a little bit tenuous. So there's a genuine danger that this deal could fall through. The wages haven't been paid still, so that's dragging on. And then to make matters worse, people may recall from some time ago when 3 Derby players were involved in a car crash.
Yeah.
When I think it's fair to say the driver may have had a shandy, or two. And Richard Keogh, the club captain, he was in the back of the car. He wasn't wearing a seatbelt. Again, he had a few. He doesn't drive. He was involved in the crash, and he was injured quite badly. That wrecked his cruciates.
Yeah.
And the other 2 players ran away, which isn't exactly the part of the purpose of the evening was team building.
Yeah.
So to run away from your captain when he's injured in the back of a car suggests that project didn't work particularly well. Derby then accused Richard Keogh of gross misconduct, but not the 2 people in the front of the car, on the grounds that he was quite old, and therefore they couldn't recover a transfer fee from him. Yeah. And they found him guilty of gross misconduct. I believe that was upheld by the EFL, but it's now gone to some form of tribunal, and it appears that Richard Keogh is going to be getting a settlement of around about £2.1 million. So to add to all of Derby's present woes, they've got to now find another £2 million. They are going to appeal, so never say never. And as we know only too well, the only genuine winners out of this are going to be our silver tongue friends in the legal profession. If it's been if it's been an internal hearing, an EFL hearing, now a tribunal, and now an appeal. So it's been dragging on, but you've got to feel for the fans. They just want to concentrate on getting back. The Wayne Rooney's now the manager. They won the other night. They beat Bournemouth. All lots of positives, and then this news seeps through as well.
Yeah, the problem with that Richard Keogh thing is, my background in a long, long time ago in HR, and I still know people who practice it. They'll get it right one day. Hey. But that was clearly badly handled at the time, that Richard Keogh situation. And I remember talking to somebody who said this will come back big time. And the problem is, if there are still other prospective buyers out there, it just doesn't look good, does it? If that's a sort of, when you're doing your due diligence or investigating a club you might want to buy, it's a sort of thing that doesn't look good. But as you say, this is going to run and run, but slightly better news on the pitch, which is brilliant. Kieran, you've been looking at some numbers, which is what you do. It's how you roll. These are big numbers, big Premier League numbers around loans, aren't they?
Yes. Football has taken a bit of a beating, I think, from a number of sources, and it's an easy target. And one of those is that there's loads of money in the game. The players should take pay cuts. The Premier League should bail out everybody else in football, and so on. So I can't. Somebody mentioned it to me. Does the Premier League owe any money itself? So that gave me an opportunity to dive into a spreadsheet. The Premier League has outstanding loans of over £4 billion. Wow. And on top of that, it owes about another £1.5 billion in terms of outstanding transfer fees. So the total debts, football and loans, is over £5 billion. And I know, there reaches a point where there's so many zeros after a number that it's difficult to get a real feel for it. But it is indicative that the football industry is like others. It uses debt, and there's nothing wrong with debt. Yeah. But the common perception that the game is awash with cash simply isn't the case. Some of those loans are from club owners. So, Roman Abramovich, he's owed about £1.3 billion by Chelsea. He's not going to ask for his money back. He'll get his money back if he ever chooses to sell the club. He doesn't charge interest. So, yes, it's a loan, but no, it's not actually a problem. We've got other owners. Even Mike Ashley is owed £111 million by Newcastle United, but for all his pantomime villain faults, and Mike Ashley has not been a good owner for Newcastle. He's probably not been the worst owner of all time either in terms of football. He's not charged interest, but then you've got the likes of David Gold and David Sullivan at West Ham, who have made around about £18 million in interest from their involvement with the club. So there's good and bad, and there's still, of course, non-owner debt as well of over £2 billion. The majority of that is Spurs and Manchester United. But even so, it's not great. And of course, Arsenal have borrowed £120 million from the Bank of England last week themselves. Although the people say, well, football clubs shouldn't be doing that. I go, well, why shouldn't they? If lampshade manufacturing companies can do it and financial services companies can do it, and then why not football clubs? Because they're having to operate in an environment where they can't earn money through the turnstiles, but they've still got the costs of running the club.
Yeah, it sometimes seems odd to think of them as loans, Kieran, when as you say, so many of them will never be called in, and so many of them are at such low interest that it doesn't seem to have the same sort of threat. Most other people, when you talk about another business, a lampshade company, for example, getting a massive loan, the antennae goes and you think, oh, crikey, that's not a good sound. But for football clubs, it just seems a basic tenet of business. And I assume when you say the Premier League owes that much money, there are no clubs that don't own money. It's every single club owns a certain amount of that money, presumably.
No, I think Villa owe nothing.
Oh, really? Okay.
Because Villa were in a horrendous state prior to their most recent takeover. When they first of all, they had a guy called Randy Lerner, which is a fantastic name for any particular businessman. He walked away £150 million lighter. Villa cost him a fortune. Then there was Dr. Tony G, who ran up loads of debts. And then Wes Edens and his partner have come in, and they've written off all of those debts. So Villa actually have no debt. Burnley had no debt until the new owners came in a few weeks ago and loaded it up with borrowings to fund the takeover. But it does very much vary by club to club.
Okay, and what about West Brom? Do you know what their loans are? Because there's a takeover battle there now, isn't there?
Well, they do owe a wee bit of money, not significant. It looks as if there are 3 parties involved. And this is a story from Matt Hughes in the Mail that came out. And the reason why my antennae got twitching was one of the prospective owners who has been named is a guy called Mark Campbell. Now, if I of course, when I get people's names, the first thing I do is I go to company's house. I start to do some background checks. He's operated a lot of companies. Most of them have been dissolved. They include hairdressing companies and taxi companies. So you're not thinking, well, is this person in a position to take over a £200 million football club? He's also set up a company called Fenway Sports Capital here in the UK, which I think he was going to use as his vehicle to make a takeover. He set that up with £100. So all of these things start to get you a little bit concerned, and then you dig into the background, and I'm indebted here to the fans of Falkirk. I don't think we've mentioned Falkirk before.
I don't think we have. No, what? Hello, Falkirk.
Hello, Falkirk, indeed. But Mark Campbell at one stage was going to take over their club, and they did an investigation, and they found that his background wasn't quite as wealthy as he was made out. Then he was linked to Sunderland with a takeover there, and we know that the owners have been desperate. And I spoke to one of the journalists who I know in the Northeast, and they said, all 3 words, Kieran, proof of funds. And that's why the deal disappeared. So it looks as if perhaps he didn't have as much money. He's based in New York at present. He's involved in real estate, as they like to call it, or being an estate agent, as we tend to call it over here, which doesn't sound as glamorous.
It doesn't, does it?
It doesn't sound as glamorous. So I think for West Brom's sake, it's probably best that he doesn't get involved. I think he's now disappearing off the radar. But the present owner, Lai Goat Guo Chan, apologies, Nigel Lee, our Hong Kong correspondent, will correct my pronunciation there.
Yes.
He's looking for around about £200 million, but I think the biggest offer he's had to date is only 130. So whether he's going to get his money back, I think is highly debatable.
Is it legal, Kieran, for him to call his company Fenway Sports Capital? I mean, there is obviously a well-known Fenway Sports Group already, isn't there?
Yeah, Fenway Sports Group is based in Boston in the US. So there is a rule, there's a legal rule of what's referred to as passing off, which isn't the same as breaking off. And that's when, by using a name, you are trying to pretend to be somebody else. So if I set up a company called Kevin Day Limited, you could legitimately say, well, under the circumstances, you don't think that's appropriate because as Kevin Day, you might feel that people might misinterpret how that company was run. And if it was run poorly, that would have an impact upon your ability sort of in the industry in which you operate. So there are things that can be of concern, but it looks as if Fenway Sports Capital is just about sufficiently different to not deal with this issue of passing off. I know somebody that set up CPFC 2018 Limited, for example, and that got through, and Palace are run by CPFC 2010. So the legal people don't tend to get involved unless there is any evidence of some form of attempted fraud or misrepresentation.
Yeah, if Kevin Day Limited was run poorly, people would say, yeah, it's definitely his company. They would be passing off is an issue in our industry as well, when you occasionally will hear somebody on an advert doing a voiceover that sounds a little bit like Stephen Fry, but not enough like Stephen Fry for Stephen Fry to be able to say, hang on a second, that's not me. Because you'll hear a lot of people's voices going, that's definitely Claire Balding. And they go, it's not, but it sounds just different enough. Southampton have switched kit manufacturers, which seems like odd timing, Kieran.
Yes, sort of halfway through a season, and people might recall that Southampton had big problems at the start of this season with their kit because their sponsors just disappeared. So that had caused an issue. The kit manufacturers are Under Armour, and Under Armour they've not been having financial problems, but they've not been delivering the numbers that the market has expected. So by all accounts, they're having a major restructuring, and they're trying to pull out of team sport. So they're doing this in the US. Southampton were their main team here in the Premier League. So that they came to a mutual understanding because they'd signed a 5-year contract. It still has 2.5 years remaining. And Hummel are going to take in. And I think that, if you are a Southampton fan, you've probably got some romantic memories of Hummel kit from days gone by when Sir Matt was in his prime and pomp. Although I've never forgiven Matt Letizia, that the first ever fantasy football league I was in, I was leading it last week of the season, and Matt Letizia scored a hat-trick against Oldham, and he cost me my first trophy. But I'm not bitter about it, 25 years later, because I'm a grown-up. Yeah,
well, you say that, but you're in a fantasy football league, Kieran, so there's an element of not really grown up there, really. I'm not at home at the fantasy football league. I'm the grumpy one in the office who just goes, can we get on with some work now, really, rather than worrying about whether you made Wilf Zaha captain or not in your fantasy football team. Having said that, I quite like the Southampton kit this year, which is a throwback to their first ever kit. It's a nice kit, and they're also playing annoyingly good football because they're normally one of the teams you can bank on to be in and around the mid-table relegation battle. I think we were both panicking.
Of which we're not talking.
Of which we're not talking. Yeah, I think we were both panicking when West Brom equalised just a little bit. 2 Manchester City stories, Kieran. Both of them, I have to say, a bit strange. Firstly, they've appointed a lead AI scientist.
Yes, this is Manchester City appointing somebody called Laurie Shaw to look after their data science operation. And you then look at this guy's background. He's got a PhD in computational astrophysics from Cambridge.
Wow.
He then developed a trading system for a hedge fund. He's been advising the government in terms of data analysis. And he's currently lecturing at Harvard. So, Jesus Christ, this guy is clearly got the brain the size of a planet.
Yeah. Does he need a presenter for a podcast at all?
Well, yeah, I'll try and contact him. He will probably talk in words so long that we'll run out of space on the podcast before he finishes a sentence.
Yeah, but he'll tell you that space is an infinite. Oh, never mind. I couldn't think. I was trying to think of something impressively scientific. Yeah, carry on.
But I think this does show the importance of data science in respect of modern football. I've said on more than one occasion, in my opinion, the existing teams at Manchester City, Leicester and Liverpool are the best 3 data analytical teams in the Premier League. And look at the Premier League table and where those clubs presently are.
That's interesting.
And that does reflect it. And the whole point about data science, it's all about identifying value. So looking at metrics in respect of football players, you're not necessarily going to get them cheap, but it's if a player is in the market for 30 million, is he actually worth 30 million? This is a way of working out where you can get relative bargains and where players are perhaps relatively overpriced. Clearly, it was very successful in baseball, although baseball is a slightly simpler sport than football because it's slightly more cricket orientated. It's one person versus one. to a degree, football is far more interlinked, but it does show the direction in which football is going. And we've already mentioned Burnley sort of in passing. The Burnley owners, they believe that the way that they're going to make money out of Burnley is through data science. My only concern is that ultimately there's a fixed number of footballers in the world. And if everybody's got the golden shot, the golden touch in identifying the talent, I can't see how Burnley are going to be able to leapfrog over the likes of Manchester City and Leicester and Liverpool. Admittedly, that they're probably fishing in a slightly different pool in terms of price, but that appears to be the objectives of the new owners, and it'll be an interesting one to watch how that develops over the next few years.
Yeah, although watching Man City Palace the other night, it did strike me that perhaps somebody at Palace could do some data science and say, don't start a game against Man City with 8 players over the age of 30. Might help.
Probably don't start a match against Manchester City.
That's a good point.
Is probably the way that they're playing at present.
Yeah.
So that's the first story.
Yeah. So sorry, before data science, is that a fancy word for Moneyball then?
I think it's Moneyball squared.
Okay, right.
Moneyball was it was the start of use of data here. If you think of the changes and the improvements that we've made in terms of having the likes of Opta and StatsBomb and so on over the last decade, who are tracking so many more metrics in terms of players than has been done historically. Yeah. It's Moneyball taken very much to the level. So it's a bit like 4-dimensional chess.
Yeah. What? Okay. Yes. I interrupted you with that question, Kieran, because you were about to go on and say to yourself what the second question was. And we've had this conversation before, Kieran. The only thing I bring to this pod is asking the questions, essentially. So please don't take that away from me, Kieran, because otherwise people will see through the smoke and mirrors like the Wizard of Oz and go, do you know what? This bloke Kieran could do the whole pod himself. The second, I'm still laughing at Jizz Cafe, by the way, which went down very well. With,
yes, it did.
Except Ali, of course, whose eyebrows just lifted ever so slightly like Roger Moore. Man City, the second story, they've been accused of creating a fake job for a young Brazilian player's dad, which I'm rather hoping that the fake job is leading AI scientist. But that would be, I take it not, though.
Yeah, it's a very weird story here, and Manchester City have pushed back on this very firmly. As soon as I saw the words "fake Brazilian," that brought me back to Moscow, actually. But that's a separate issue. This is all to do with Gabriel Almeida, who joined Manchester City in 2011, aged 14. So he was one of their academy players. Now, under Premier League rules, you are not allowed to give inducements to either the young person concerned or members of his family to try to attract him to the club. And by all accounts, Gabriel Almeida, Spurs were interested, Sporting Lisbon were interested.
Sporting what?
Sporting. I got half caught between Sporting Lesbian and Sporting Lisbon, so I said Sporting Lisbon.
It's just a little insight into what's going on in your head. Yes, I would support Sporting Lisbon if there was such a club. Let's go.
Yes. Historically, there's always been very close links between Portugal and Brazil.
Yeah, of course.
So therefore, the attractions of going to Lisbon must have been significant. And these accusations have been made by the player's father. Now, this could involve an element of sour grapes. He said, the father, he was offered a position as an academy scout. He did absolutely no work, and he's been showing pay slips. So, if it was you or me, if somebody was paying me £1,000 a month for doing no work, I wouldn't be whinging to the press about it. I'd be keeping quiet about it.
Absolutely.
And he said that Manchester City, part of the reason why he didn't do any work was that Manchester City did ask him to attend two courses, but they took place in English, and he only speaks Portuguese. So you can understand he's a bit of a problem. And we're not talking megabucks here, but on a slightly more serious note, there is an ongoing issue with young players and the way that they are being, and it's a horrible word to use, harvested by some football clubs, and you never know. Players now, we're seeing kids of 3, 4, 5 being invited along to academies, and then the more you delve into things and the more background you do, some of the stories don't reflect well on the clubs. The FA does have very strict rules, but it looks as if, and this isn't a reference to Manchester City, there are clubs who are offering some form of financial inducements to the families of these young men, and they go on to sign for that club. Now, that player could be worth, of course, millions or tens of millions of pounds, and it's something we've mentioned on quite a few occasions. These are young men; they are not commodities. But unfortunately, they are being treated as nothing more than pieces of inventory, and that really is a cause for concern for me.
I couldn't agree more, Kieran, but there are older, cynical listeners of this show, hello Martin, who would say that this has been going on since time immemorial, to the extent that I'm a big fan of, I loved reading about football in the old days, in the 30s, 40s, 50s, and you read about Brian Clough and managers like that, and half their stories are about them turning up at young players' houses with presents for families and offers of jobs. So I mean, this, and over the period of time, it becomes a funny anecdote rather than the disgraceful story that it actually is. So this is nothing new. What's new is that the football authorities still don't seem to be able to get a handle on it and be able to prevent it, do they? Because the trouble is, again, being older and cynical, the parents don't particularly want the authorities to get a handle on it. They're only too happy to have the inducements, I would guess.
Yeah, they'd argue, who's the losers? My son was going to go to a football club anyway. I've now received some form of financial benefit, but it does mean that potentially you have got parents, and I've seen this at youth football level, who see their talented child as a meal ticket. And love your kids for what they are, for as long as they are what they are, is my view. You don't procreate to make a payoff out of them in a few years' time.
Well, it's occasionally in the back of your mind, isn't it? Yes, well said, Kieran. I agree heartedly. But if you could not say fake Brazilian again, because I don't think Manscaped would approve, to be perfectly honest. Grimsby Town, we haven't really spoken about the virus for some time, thank God. But Grimsby Town have become the first club to be fined for coronavirus safety breaches. Yes,
and this goes back to last September. Grimsby Town had some matches postponed as a result of COVID, and the EFL did an investigation. And I think you've got to give them some credit here. They were not particularly comfortable, by all accounts, with the way that things happened. And it looks as if the club had not been social distancing, had not been applying the rules. There hadn't been sufficient self-isolation initially, and that allowed things to potentially worsen. And I've praised Ian Holloway in the past. Here I've got to say, I don't think Ian's played a blinder, because apparently he started arranging some darts matches between him and the players as a bonding and a training tool. Now, at a time when we are all supposed to be social distancing, this doesn't look too good. There was car sharing as well. You should be trying to minimise things of this nature. So the EFL have done an investigation, and the good thing from Grimsby's point of view is that the penalties have been financial rather than impacting the club upon the pitch, because they're not having the greatest of seasons, and they are towards the bottom end of League Two. So they've had a fine of just under $5,000. That's been suspended. They've also had to pay the EFL's costs of the investigation, which was another $13,000. And they've had to pay compensation to Cheltenham, Bradford and Hull, who were the three opponents who had the matches postponed and who'd had already made plans. So it is costly. We've got to take this serious in more ways than one. And darts matches, it doesn't look clever.
That doesn't look clever. I quite agree. And but in terms of the car sharing stuff, I mean, a Grimsby Town fan would point out that it's a lot easier for Liverpool and Man United to get separate cars for the players or separate coaches for 4 or 5 players to go to games than it is for the likes of Grimsby. So you can understand where the odd cutting corner would come in financially. But yes, you're absolutely right. Darts games, it's not a good look. But it is obvious as well, Kieran, that certainly in the Premier League, the protocols are being observed far more strictly. We know the Premier League basically slapped the wrist of every single club in the Premier League 2 weeks ago and said to stop goal celebrating, stop shaking hands after games, etc. And that clearly has. And judging by the amount of sarcastic get away from me goal celebrations there have been in the Premier League, the players are not particularly happy about it. But they do seem to be...
I thought James Maddison's been amazing.
Yeah, and quite rightly. So most of the players are sensible enough. They've got older, vulnerable people at home as well, so they do it. It's just that obviously the media will find the one who doesn't do it rather than the 21 who do it. And luckily, the last 2 rounds of testing in the Premier League has shown that numbers are right down. So the talk about suspending football seems to have gone away. But on a similar note, north of the border, Kieran, Kilmarnock and St Mirren have won their appeals against point deduction for coronavirus breaches and failing to fulfil fixtures.
Yes, so this was a ruling by the Scottish authorities pre-Christmas. Kilmarnock and St Mirren had both had matches forfeited. So, this was a significant penalty impacting them in terms of the table. And that has implications clearly potentially for relegation, for prize money at the end of the season and so on. And their opposition were given walkover results, and I think Motherwell were due to play both clubs. So Motherwell ended up with an additional 6 points for doing nothing. The 2 clubs have put in an appeal, and as a result of that, the matches I believe are now going to be played at some point in the season, and the initial fines for both clubs, which were £40,000, have been reduced by half. And again, half of that has been suspended on top of it. So the clubs have said, yes, we could have done things better. They've held their hands up, but they felt that the initial penalty was too harsh, and the tribunal has agreed.
Yeah, okay. Back to England, Kieran, for our last 2 stories. They're opposite ends of the financial scale, and I guess opposite ends of the seriousness scale as well. The really serious story. The National League, there seems to be some confusion whether the recent bailout is actually a grant or a loan.
Yeah, this is quite complex. I mean, the DCMS via the National Lottery did give £10 million to clubs in the National League in October. Now that has been confirmed as a grant. That was deemed to be enough to allow the National League to continue for around about 3 months.
Yeah.
Then there's another £11 million, which I think is due to come into play in February. And I think the National League clubs initially thought that would be on similar terms. It subsequently turns out that £11 million is going to be a loan from the government and therefore will be repayable. But if you think about a National League team, they've got no match day income coming in. Yeah. They don't have a broadcast deal which is worth even talking about. And all of their commercial partners have said, well, what's the point of sponsoring you either at the ground or front of shirt if nobody's watching because people aren't attending the matches? And there is some streaming, but not very much. So the clubs are genuinely desperate for cash. And the money which came in October, there have been huge issues with regards to the distribution, and those are still rumbling on.
Indeed.
We've covered those in depth.
Yeah.
But I was in contact with somebody from a National League side in the last 24 hours, and I said, well, what's your take on this? And he says, well, as far as we're concerned, we'll never be in a position to repay the loan, so we want the season abandoned. But other clubs, especially those clubs who potentially are going to be promoted back to the EFL, I think Hartlepool are up there and clubs of that nature, they'll be desperate to stay on. He said, I can understand their position, but there is now, I think, unless the National League goes into some form of hibernation, which will allow the clubs to furlough players and put itself into minimising day-to-day costs. If the matches still go ahead, I think there's now going to be a very significant risk of more clubs going bust.
Will this news have come as a surprise to these clubs, Kieran?
I guess as they've got, I think it's been so much bad blood within the National League itself with regards to the first distribution that now that we're approaching February, they're starting to look at the next payment. And was there going to be a bun fight over that? And somebody's realised, jeepers creepers, it's no longer a grant. It is in the form of a loan. And therefore, if we've got no money coming in, how on earth can we be expected to have money going out?
Yeah, it comes back to something we've been discussing since the very first pod we did. I mean, you're talking about amounts of money that the top six clubs in the Premier League could find down the back of a sofa, basically. But what's your instinct as to how this one will play out, Kieran?
I think the National League will try to push through a continuation of the season. Now, if you take a look at the way that votes are organised, it's very, very heavily weighted towards the teams in the National League itself, as opposed to the teams in National League North and South.
Right.
So if there are sufficient teams in the National League who feel that they've got a chance of promotion, and remember the playoffs in the National League, they go down a fair way in the table, it could be that will force things through. And then if there is a threat of a points per game settlement, again, those clubs towards the bottom of the division who don't want to drop into National League North and South, they've got an incentive to play on as well. Yeah. So it's going to be nasty. That's all we know for sure. And there's already an awful lot of bad feeling within that particular part of English football at present.
Yeah, and you also worry that, and I very rarely get to use the expression silver tongue friends, but you also think that somewhere along the line they're going to get involved as well, don't you?
Yes, because I think clubs will say that they are in danger of substantial financial penalties or financial losses if the matches go ahead, and it's not being done in their best interest, it's being in the best interest of others. So somebody will be phoning up a lawyer and saying, well, where do we stand in respect of all this?
Yeah. Finally, Kieran, a story which I think is refreshingly old school. Remember a couple of stories ago we talked about the old days and things going on since time immemorial. This is the mysterious non-appearance of Robert Snodgrass for West Brom against West Ham this week. Yes, this is another classic comment from Big. I mean, he's been an absolute minefield for this programme. He's only been in place since December the 16th.
When the West Bromwich Albion team was announced, people looked down, and Snodgrass had played very well for them at the weekend when they won 3-2 at Wolves. So people looked down and said, well, he's not in the team. He's not even on the bench. Yeah. And then Sam Allardyce revealed that as part of the agreement for Robert Snodgrass being transferred from West Ham to West Bromwich Albion, that he wouldn't play in this match. Now, that is in breach of Premier League rules, which says, and FA rules, which says effectively, in the result of a final transfer, the selling club has no influence over what the player does in terms of his relationship with his new employer. I think Big Sam then realised when this was pointed out to him, he was trying to walk back, and David Moyes was sort of doing a meerkat impersonation, just looking very wide-eyed and saying, well, it's all news to me. So I can see that the Premier League launching some form of investigation. Whether this will null and void the transfer in due course, we don't know. Where this leaves Robert Snodgrass in terms of West Brom's next match, I don't think they've got a match this weekend because they were knocked out of the FA Cup a couple of weeks ago. So, it is messy and it is indicative. If you've got to follow the rules in football. You and I are both old enough to remember things like FA Cup matches being. Results being overturned when an unregistered player, normally in a non-league team, turned out to have played for the club and therefore he wasn't eligible. it would be, and as much as as a Brighton fan who's in a relegation fight, I would not want West Brom to have any sanction in terms of what happens on the pitch as a result of this. If it was a mistake, I suspect it was an honest mistake, but. Yeah, paperwork issues should not dictate or determine what football happens in terms of the 90 minutes.
Well, I mean, it sounds like a funny story on the face of it. It sounds like one of those stories that if you read it in those books from the 70s we were talking about earlier, you'd go, oh, yeah, of course, and raise your eyebrows. But there are potential ramifications there. I mean, first of all, the sensible thing to do would have been just to say he's got a knock, he can't play today, and magically he'll be fit. We're not playing in the FA Cup, he will be fit for the next game. And then the sensible thing to do once you're caught out on that would have been to say, oh, no, it's just a word of mouth thing. It was foolish. We shouldn't have agreed it. It was a handshake. But I spoke to a lawyer as well. If this is in the contract, one of these clubs could be in trouble, and it could be. I doubt very much if it is. I mean, the legal person I spoke to said they would be mad if it's in the contract. But you would guess if West Ham insisted on it, they would be the club that get sanctioned. From what I can gather, the research I've done and the people I have spoken to, it's a serious issue that doesn't carry much of a serious charge. But again, it's an odd one that it became so public, isn't it? Really, and. It's just like I say, it's oddly old school, but there are issues involved. I mean, especially the other clubs around West Brom who are in the relegation battle, I imagine would be absolutely furious that they weren't able to field a full side last night.
Well, yes and no. It weakened West Brom, didn't it?
Yeah, so it did. Yeah.
So for the other relegation sides are probably relieved, but West Ham, West Ham are now potentially going to have they're pitching for a Europa League place. So the other clubs around that 5th, 6th, 7th, 8th, you can see them being hacked off, and a verbal contract is still a contract. Yeah.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. So I was. So bemused at occupying the moral high ground there for a second. I forgot which club were going to be upset by which was going on. We end, Kieran, with a clarification, which I'm not entirely sure. I said this was a worldwide issue, but I'm happy to say this. Remember we talked about Peckham Town recently?
Oh, yes.
Yes, you remember that?
Oh, yes.
With their brilliant nickname. And I said that we believed that Mary Phillip of Peckham Town had become the first woman manager to coach a men's team to a senior trophy when they won the London FA Trophy last year. However, Nigel Lee gets another mention. Our esteemed Hong Kong correspondent has been in touch to say that Chan Yuen Ting coached the Eastern football team in Hong Kong to a senior title in 2016. So I'm very happy to set that record straight. Unless, of course, anybody listening out there knows of a female manager who did that achievement before even Chan Yuen Ting.
Didn't Cherry Lungi do it in the I was about to say the governess there, but in the manageress?
See again, sporting lesbian governess. These are all think before you speak. Sometimes, Kieran. She did. I don't remember that program. Yes, I do remember it. But yeah, I do remember the people going, a female manager of a male football team. That will never happen. She was bad. I've watched. Don't ask me why, but for research, I've been watching old episodes of Death in Paradise. I reckon Cherry Lungi's in about 4 of them.
Right.
Yeah, probably married to the casting director. I don't know. And if she's not, I apologise before Guy says you've got to apologise next week for implying that Cherry Lungi was married to the casting director. Yes, if you do know. Yeah, we need to end this pod now, Kieran, don't we, before we tie ourselves into even more knots. Not those sort of knots, Kieran. If you do know of a female manager who, even before Chan Yuen Ting, coached a men's football team, please let us know, and we'll be happy to clarify further. Email us at questions@priceoffootball.com. And if you have any questions for our next pod on any aspect of football finance, please also email us at questions@priceoffootball.com. In the meantime, Guy tells us, Kieran, in one of his rare missives, that there's a storm coming our way, so we have to batten down the hatches. Which is it's very random, the things that Guy gets in touch with us about. You get an email from Guy, you think, hello, some more money's turned up. It's no, it's very windy and it's heading your way. So, oh, okay, fair enough. I'll tell Kieran. Have you got the wind so far, Kieran?
It was bad last night. It's okay today. Me and Finley, we've been out. One or two trees a bit sideways, but other than that, all okay. All okay.
Good. How's his squeaky chipmunk?
Well, his squeaky chipmunk has been put away in his toy drawer. We run a professional outfit, me and you, Kevin. Yeah, and that is the general perception, of course.
Yeah, I once asked the Baroness about that, and she said, "Yeah, I'll put it away in his toy drawer." But never mind. I'll leave. We really do need to end this. I imagine 20,000 people have already ended it for us, Kieran. But for those 20,000 left, perhaps you'd like to say goodbye.
Well, once again, folks, thank you for the support. If you're enjoying the show, why not go and press that subscribe button on Apple Podcasts or Spotify? If you could leave us a review, a 5-star review, it makes big changes. I mean, producer guy says it helps keep us up the table, which helps us when we're phoning up people asking for guests, and they go, "Well, we've never heard of you," and we can say, "Well, hey, look, we're number 67 in Azerbaijan's top 100 in podcasts this week, so take that." It doesn't matter what you say in the reviews. It's just you give us the 5 stars. That makes a difference. You could say the show would be so much better if it was presented by Donald Trump, who presently appears to be unemployed, and Susie Sue of Susie of the Banshees. I think that would make a fantastic pairing. You can write whatever you want. Me and Kevin, our egos can cope with it. And apart from that, for heaven's sake, just look after yourselves. We've turned a corner with this horrendous disease in terms of the vaccination. Let's all keep indoors until we really got it on the run.
Yep. Never mind Azerbaijan, still number 1 in Dominica. Thank you, Dominica.
The price of football. The price of football.